Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Yennefer, who was in a deep sleep, appeared gauntly. However, her slender and delicate features were of a typical southern woman's, giving people a gentle and approachable feeling. However, everything changed in less than 15 minutes. As the sedative wore off, she slowly woke up, her eyes empty and confused as she looked at her surroundings. Jones approached her and tried calling her name several times, but Yennefer did not respond at all. With a disappointed expression, Jones quickly fetched 2 straps and fastened them to Yennefer's wrists. Seeing this scene, Roxanne frowned slightly. Wouldn't such a restraint method only further provoke her? Just as she thought this, Yennefer's face suddenly changed. Her previously lifeless eyes turned sharp, and a vicious expression appeared on her face.
Let me go.
What are you doing? Jones, release me now. You'll come to a bad end. How dare you treat me like this? Call James over. I want him to pay with his life. Damn it, do you think you can keep me trapped like this? Where is that kid, James? Her current state was nothing like the calm and composed Yennefer Lucian once knew. In addition to her hysterical screams, Yennefer desperately tried to break free from the straps, eventually standing up from the bed and suddenly appearing in front of Roxanne. Her twisted face, filled with anger and hatred, startled Roxanne. Fortunately, Lucian reacted quickly, pulling Roxanne back and behind him. Jones' warning had only come right then. Be careful, don't get too close. She will scratch and bite. It's happening again. Mr. Lon, why would Mrs. Lon want to hurt James? Roxanne regained her composure, no longer afraid, as she had seen many patients with mania before. Despite that, she couldn't help but feel puzzled. In this altered state, it was as if the mentally ill patient's consciousness had been replaced by another person. What kind of consciousness has taken over Yennefer's body at this moment? Some scientists had proposed that mentally ill patients might be experiencing confusion between 2 personalities from different dimensions, leading to incoherent speech and strange behavior. Before Jones could answer, Robert and several other psychologists entered the room. Robert nodded slightly and said calmly, "Allow me to explain from the psychological perspective. In her current state, Miss Thompson probably imagines herself as her twin sister, Sheba Thompson, due to some past trauma. As for the reason, Mr. Lon has not discussed it with us in detail. As for why she would hate her own nephew, I'm afraid only Mr. Lon knows." After he finished speaking, all the doctors looked toward Jones. Lucian felt a sinking feeling in his heart. It seemed that the rumor from years ago was true. He vaguely remembered that James had mentioned this incident before. It happened in Zendale before the Lon family moved to Horrington. The Thompson sisters met Jones around the same time, and both fell in love with him. In the end, Jones chose Yennefer, the elder sister. Sheba, the younger sister, was repressed for a while but eventually seemed to accept the harsh truth. However, it turned out that what Sheba displayed was only a false appearance. In fact, she was constantly jealous of her sister, Yennefer. Her evil thoughts clouded her mind, and she even plotted to secretly poison her sister, hoping to make her disabled. In doing so, she could become Yennefer's replacement and stay by Jones' side forever. She was executing her plan the other day in the kitchen, spiking the soup with a drug that would cause major damage to the nerves. Sheba never thought that James would sneak into the kitchen for food in the middle of his study. Thus, he witnessed what she was doing. James was initially confused by what she was doing, so he asked her about it. However, Sheba panicked. She tried to lie to James. Alas, James was a smart boy. He did not believe what she said, and he decided to tell his parents about it. Sheba became frantic, and she quickly ran after him to stop him. James was a child, after all. He thrashed in her grip and screamed. Sheba pinned him down, but he kicked her in response, making her stumble backward. At that moment, Yennefer and Jones returned. That was how they watched Sheba lose her balance and fall into the deep well. Perhaps Sheba had knocked her head on her way down and passed out, for she sunk without even getting the chance to scream. Jones and Yennefer hastily tried to save her, but it took them forever and a day to get her out of the well. By then, it was too late. Sheba was dead. James never expected that to happen. His father beat him terribly despite how he tried to tell him again and again about what he saw. Ultimately, they found evidence of his aunt's attempted poisoning in the kitchen. The loss of her sister and the revelation of Sheba's plan broke Yennefer. Her mental breakdown led to a terrible period of illness, and she was in a coma for half a month. When Yennefer woke again, she was no longer quite the same. The trauma made her manic. She would act exactly like her younger sister, Sheba Thompson, whenever she was in one of her episodes. That year, James had been 13. From then on, every time his mother had her episode, she would see James as her enemy and hurl insults at him. James was depressed for a while, but in the end, he decided to become a psychologist to save his mother from her mental illness. After countless research and visits to various famed doctors, he finally figured out that his mother's illness was probably born out of her connection to her twin sister. His mother, Yennefer, was unable to process the traumatic incident, so another alter identity was formed in her, and that identity was her sister, Sheba. Moreover, Yennefer mimicked the fear Sheba felt before the latter's death. That was why she subconsciously assumed her sister would deem James as an enemy. Every time Yennefer had her episode, she would go on and on about killing James. James was on the verge of breaking down after witnessing his mother's episodes. Yet, he never gave up. He continued visiting various countries for his mother. As a matter of fact, he started becoming superstitious. When he heard that there was an ancient shaman in Allender who could control episodes like his mother's, he decided to bring his mother to the shaman. The truth was that they had gone to Allender a few years ago, and they had found a supposed shaman to treat Yennefer. Perhaps subconsciously, Yennefer knew that if the entire family would be affected if she continued to have these episodes. Perhaps the ceremony really did have a psychological effect. In any case, Yennefer's condition stabilized after that trip. The shaman was close to death on their second trip to Allender. After visiting the shaman, the family stayed for the shaman's funeral. Then, they planned to visit Allender's grasslands to see the wildlife. No one expected an accident to happen. To protect his parents, James shot the thugs dead. The scene shocked Yennefer and triggered her memories of her sister's death. Unsurprisingly, her condition worsened again. In the room, Jones was slowly telling them what had happened in the past. Sure enough, Lucian realized the many details were the secrets James once told him. However, James never told him about his reason for studying psychology. Still, Lucian could make a guess. His mood was a roller coaster. Like Jonathan, James still kept many things a secret from him. Meanwhile, Roxanne had a look of surprise on her face. She never thought there would be so many twists and turns in the story. Her heart sank. She never thought the unbothered and mild-mannered James would be bearing such a heavy weight on his shoulders. If he were someone else, perhaps he would have been crushed by the weight. Robert Zucker and the other psychologists had similar somber expressions on their faces. They finally found out the origin of Yennefer's condition. So, Miss Thompson's previous recovery was due to the placebo effect. Since we now know what happened, let's continue adjusting our treatment plan. Mr. Lon, please give us a minute.
Let's have a
meeting, Robert said. Robert was a famous psychologist who had seen many similar cases. To some extent, individuals with mental illness had experienced a multitude of tragedies that pushed them further and further into despair. Jones nodded and led Robert and the other psychologists out of the room. He acted as if he did not hear the cries of his wife behind him, but Roxanne and Lucian noticed the dullness in his eyes. It was a look that stemmed from numbness after the misery. The indifference was only a show he put up. Jones was the primary support of the Lon family. To save his mother, His son had walked down a different path. Jones could not afford to break down nor let himself feel the sorrow. Soon, Roxanne, Lucian, and the screaming Yennefer were the only ones left in the room. It seemed like Yennefer was agitated as she screamed for people to let her go. She wanted to look for James, to punish him. Lucian, I'll try to use acupuncture to calm Mrs. Lon down first. She'll probably need therapy from a psychologist for the rest of her treatment. At most, I can only halt her episodes. A look of melancholy crossed Roxanne's face. Lucian nodded and reminded her, do your best, but don't stress yourself out too much. With that, he slowly approached Yennefer from behind before hastily grabbing Yennefer's head to stop her from struggling. With a glint, 3 needles appeared in Roxanne's hands. She then walked to Lucian's side and swiftly inserted the needles into the acupuncture points on Yennefer's head. 1, 2, 3. As the needles were inserted, Yennefer's scrunched-up face relaxed. In the end, Roxanne used 9 needles on Yennefer's head. Yennefer calmed down completely, but in the next second, to their surprise, her eyes rolled up, and she fell backward. Roxanne reacted in time and quickly supported her with an arm around her waist. Lucian, quick, undo her restraints. We'll carry her onto the bed. The couple then exerted much strength to put her comfortably on the bed. Perhaps Jones had noticed the lack of crying. He came running to check on Yennefer. When he saw his wife lying on the bed peacefully and the needles in her head, he immediately figured out what was going on. Roxanne's really a miracle worker. Her acupuncture's working. Thank you so much, Roxanne. You're really an amazing doctor. I can't believe this worked so quickly. I hired a traditional medicine practitioner in the past too, but they couldn't do anything about her condition, Jones exclaimed. Roxanne shook her head and politely denied it. The truth was that she was using cerulean needle techniques last move. To do the challenging technique of inserting needles into the head, one had to possess strong mental fortitude and the capability to improvise. Whenever her mentor did acupuncture on a patient's head, her mentor would preset the depth of the insertion to avoid accidents. However, things were urgent earlier. Roxanne had noticed Yennefer's bloodshot eyes, agitation, and skyrocketing blood pressure. The stress on her heart had been too much for her. Thus, Roxanne reminded Jones, Mr. Lon, we can't delay any further in treating Mrs. Lon's condition. We have to stabilize it as soon as possible. Otherwise, she'll be in mortal danger if her blood pressure gets too high and her heart can't keep up. Jones solemnly nodded, but there was a helpless look on his face. I know. That's why I hired so many psychologists, but the main issue we now have is Yennefer's instant agitation upon waking up. She doesn't have a period of calmness that will allow her to receive her treatment. Maybe I can lend you a helping hand with that if you trust me, Roxanne muttered. As if he had finally found a buoy in the middle of the vast sea, Jones visibly brightened up. Of course, of course. You have no idea how happy I am to hear you say that. No matter what methods you use, you have my full support. Right as Jones said that, Roxanne tugged Lucian. She then leaned closer to his ear to whisper to him her plan. Frankly, she was not confident in that plan. She was worried that Jones would not agree to it. Nevertheless, Lucian nodded and gave her a look that told her he would relay the message to him. At that, Jones blinked in confusion. Are there any other factors they need to consider? Lucian easily said, Mr. Lon, here's what Roxanne wanted to say. We have to let Mrs. Lon soak in hot water first before performing acupuncture on various acupuncture points on her body. That way, we'll be able to make her regain her mental clarity. That's fine. Why are you worried about that at a time like this? Jones was open to trying any kind of method for his wife. Hearing that, Roxanne became a little more confident. Lucian also gave her an encouraging look. Since there was no time to lose, Jones immediately told the housekeeper to prepare a huge tub of hot water while he went to talk to Robert and the other psychologists about it. Once his wife regained mental clarity, The psychologists would be able to take the opportunity to provide therapy for her. Roxanne started cleaning all of her needles with an alcohol burner to sterilize them. Lucian helped her out. Once everything was prepared, Jones carried his wife's thin body into the bathroom. He then slowly took off all of her clothes and gently placed her into the tub at Roxanne's request. The water was so hot that even in her deep sleep, Yennefer furrowed her brows in response. Roxanne quickly moved over to Yennefer with her needles. Mr. Lon, you can leave now, but please ask the lady who filled the tub earlier to come in, Roxanne told him. Jones nodded and left the bathroom. The housekeeper soon entered. Roxanne then asked the housekeeper to hold Yennefer's body up so that Roxanne could begin inserting the needles from the back of Yennefer's neck. One after another, she inserted the needles. Roxanne did every insertion meticulously. Once she inserted the needle, she would even gently twist it so that it would reach the ideal spot to agitate the acupuncture point. "Shmam, please turn her around," Roxanne said once she was done inserting the needles into Yennefer's back. The housekeeper had to hold onto Yennefer tightly to stop the latter from slipping into the water, and it was laborious. Not long after, both Roxanne and the housekeeper started sweating profusely. The acupuncture session lasted over an hour. Beads of sweat had gathered on Roxanne's forehead. She had been hunched over the entire time, so her muscles were protesting. Nevertheless, she did not think of it as a tiring job, for her focus was fully on Yennefer. When she inserted the last needle into the center of Yennefer's crown, the housekeeper exclaimed, "A doctor. Mrs. Lon is awake." Upon waking up, Yennefer surveyed her surroundings and noticed the presence of both Roxanne and the housekeeper. She then slowly recollected herself. "Laura, this is..." Yennefer recognized the housekeeper, but she did not know who Roxanne was. Taking in the calm expression on Yennefer's face, Roxanne sighed in relief. "Mrs. Lon, she's Dr. Jarvis," the housekeeper merrily informed her before hurrying out to get Jones. Despite the swell of relief in her heart, Roxanne continued keeping a close eye on Yennefer, fearing that Yennefer's moment of clarity would not last long. Jones rushed into the bathroom with clothes in his hands. When he saw his wife returning to her usual gentle demeanor, he started thanking Roxanne profusely.
Jones, what are you doing?
"Dr. Jarvis. Isn't Lucian's wife, is she? I thought they were about to marry. What's going on with me?" It had been a long time since her condition flared up, so the last thing she remembered was a moment from a long time ago. "Mr. Lon, please dress Mrs. Lon quickly. Is Professor Zucker ready?" Roxanne anxiously asked. Jones nodded. Once Roxanne was out of the bathroom, he quickly put on clothes for his wife. Jones, what happened?" What happened? Did I have another episode? What about our son? Where's our son? We're at home, right? Is our son back in the country?" It seemed like the last thing Yennefer remembered had been their trip to Allender when they encountered thugs. More specifically, the moment when James shot the thugs dead. Jones tensed up. Worried that his wife would recall what happened and revert to her previous state, he quickly redirected her attention by changing the topic. We're back. We're about to attend Lucian and Roxanne's wedding. You know, the woman from earlier." Jones knew that his wife was most concerned about their son at the moment, but he did not dare to mention James. Is that so?" "So that's the miracle doctor, Roxanne. She's so pretty and sweet. She's such a good match for Lucian. Did they come to our place to tell us about their wedding themselves?" Yennefer did not realize Jones was putting on her clothes for her as she chatted with Jones, who was anxious. He then led his wife out of the bathroom and back into the room. The next sight that greeted Yennefer frightened her. Robert had a team of doctors behind him, and they all had grim expressions on their faces. Any ordinary person would be wary upon seeing them, fearing that something bad had happened. Fortunately, Lucian and Roxanne appeared with smiles as they approached her. "Mrs. Lon, I hired these people for a product survey. If it's okay with you, why don't we go to the living room to work with them?" Yennefer had a good impression of Lucian, so her attention went to Lucian immediately as she returned the smile. Which product is it? Lucian, you're about to get married, so why are you still concerned about a product? But I have to admit, Miss Jarvis seems like a sweet and gentle woman. You two are really a match made in heaven, Yennefer said, chuckling. When Jones realized his wife's mood had stabilized, he inwardly praised Lucian's swift improvisation. To Yennefer, Lucian was just like her godson, so she let him pull her toward the living room. Roxanne then quickly reminded Robert and the others, Professor Zucker, you have to take this slow. Don't rush it. Just play along with what Lucian said earlier, that you're here for some kind of product survey. Then, slowly and subtly start treating her condition. Yes. We're professionals, so you don't need to worry about that, Robert muttered and stiffly nodded. The group of psychologists then went to the living room. Providing professional psychological guidance and assistance was beyond Roxanne and Lucian's capabilities. The two left the Lon family mansion, returning to the car where James had anxiously waited for some time. His perturbation was evident on his face. Lucian, Roxanne, how's the situation? Is my mom all right? Lucian replied displeasedly, well, it's both good and bad. Roxanne has temporarily brought Mrs. Lon's condition under control. Professor Zucker and his team are working on psychological intervention. Don't worry too much, there will be a solution. James was taken aback, apparently not knowing what had happened. Roxanne, however, knew her husband's feelings well and immediately started lecturing James. How could you keep us in the dark after such a significant matter occurred? You should have been honest from the beginning. So many things happened after the trip to Allender. That's all the more reason you should have informed Lucian right away, as she scolded. Only after listening to that did James realize Lucian was mad at him because of that. A guilty look spread across his expression as he tried to explain, it's my fault. I thought I could handle everything well, but accidents still took place. Lucian, I'm sorry. James, listen to me. Don't try to shoulder everything on your own in the future. Lucian patted his shoulder, feeling somewhat bitter still. Despite Lucian's taciturn nature, Roxanne understood her husband's feelings at that moment. Jonathan and Electra had encountered issues, and now it was James' turn. They were his lifelong friends, people he trusted unconditionally. However, they all withheld their thoughts and kept secrets, unwilling to share the truth with him. James eventually nodded and slowly brought up the past, mentioning his initial intention of becoming a psychologist and the numerous attempts he had made over the years. He hadn't told Lucian the truth because the latter also shouldered many responsibilities after taking over the Farwell family's business. As their conversation progressed, Roxanne noticed an unsettling sign. Deep down, James, like his mother, was also haunted by his aunt's death. He, too, suffered from a psychological disorder. Moreover, as a psychologist, he must have tried countless treatments, but he was still unable to make peace with the incident completely. The crux of the issue lay with Yennefer. Every time Yennefer had an episode, and her hallucinations of Sheba appeared, she would blame James for everything. She would even curse him and wish he were dead. No one could withstand being hysterically berated by their own mother, even if they knew Yennefer was in the throes of a psychotic break. Roxanne felt a headache coming on and looked at her husband. Lucian's eyes also revealed similar concerns. James' mental state is also unstable. James, the past is the past. You didn't cause Mrs. Lon's condition. Don't dwell on it. Trust in Roxanne, Professor Zucker, and the others. They will help Mrs. Lon recover. Lucian's voice pulled James from his memories. Sensing his lapse, James flashed a sheepish smile. Lucian, I'm fine. But how could he be fine? Using the need to check on the situation as an excuse, Lucian and Roxanne left the car and walked back into the villa. Upon entering the courtyard, Lucian uttered worryingly, darling, what should we do? Even James' mental state seems a little off. How can we resolve this long-lasting emotional knot in their family? Roxanne fell silent too. Although she was a skilled doctor, they were up against a psychological illness. Even if she could prescribe medication for physiological treatment, the heart's ailment ultimately required another form of therapy: reconciliation with oneself's feelings. The couple truly didn't know how to resolve the current predicament. Even with his immense power and her unparalleled medical skills, there were still situations that left them helpless. As they pondered, a sudden burst of angry yelling came from the mansion's living room. It was Yennefer's bellows. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm not sick. How could I be sick? Jones, come here quickly. Who are these people? Are they really invited here by Lucian? I don't want to talk to them anymore, nor do I want to cooperate further with this investigation. Jones hurried to his wife's side, continuously shaking his head at Professor Zucker and the others, signaling them to leave for the time being. But Mr. Lon, the most important thing is for Mrs. Lon to first acknowledge her illness. She can't avoid it. If she can't even do that, how can we guide her? Robert's expression wore a solemn expression as he emphasized his point. The other doctors nodded in agreement. A psychological intervention is about guiding patients to recognize their situation, not to evade the problem. Mrs. Lon's current condition requires her to face the entire matter and comprehend the reality from a logical perspective. No matter what, Mrs. Lon's twin sister has already passed away. Before they could speak more, Yennefer's face suddenly froze, and she became furious the next second. What's that balderdash? My sister, Sheba, is clearly in Zendale, serving as the general manager of our Lon Group's subsidiary. You know nothing, yet you're talking utter nonsense. Her emotions escalated, and anger filled her eyes. Get out, all of you. Aren't you psychologists supposed to be making products? Jones, bring Lucian here. Has he been deceived by these people? When Lucian and Roxanne entered and heard Yennefer's words, they exchanged astonished glances. The person who had been serving as the general manager of Lon Group had always been Yennefer. It turned out that in Yennefer's subconsciousness, her sister had never died. She had attributed all her achievements to her sister. The root cause still lay in Sheba's death years ago. At that moment, Robert and the other psychologists were all grimacing. Noticing Lucian had shown up, Yennefer immediately complained, Lucian, you must check these people's backgrounds. Do you think they're trying to trick you and scam your money for investments? Is that so? I'll have to interrogate them then. Lucian sounded as if he was placating a child. However, it worked effectively, as Yennefer's expression softened immediately. You must investigate thoroughly. 7 or 8 years ago, Sheba was almost deceived by a supplier too. Yennefer seemed to have slipped back into her confused state. Nevertheless, Lucian walked up to her, smiled gently, and handed her a glass of water. Mrs. Lon, calm down and have some water first. I'll make sure to question these people. With that, he turned to look at Robert and politely said, let's pause for now. Tonight may not be an appropriate time. Mr. Farwell, although no one can compare to your achievements in business, we are clearly more professional in handling Ms. Thompson's issue. We don't think your approach is beneficial for her. Robert was stubborn, and his tone was laced with fury. Lucian nodded, acknowledging that the other party was right. Still, he waved his hand, asking them to leave. In the end, Robert left with the psychologists, all of them looking upset and slightly beside themselves. Lucian thought, this Professor Zucker's emotional control isn't up to par either. He claims he's a specialist, but he has somewhat neglected and behaved insensitively toward the patient's condition. Jones swiftly went to his wife's side to comfort her. In order to help Yennefer regain her composure, Roxanne strode over and initiated a conversation, mentioning the upcoming wedding and asking for Yennefer's help. By creating a new topic of discussion, Yennefer's attention gradually shifted to those matters. It was late at night when Elias and Sonia realized that the young couple had not returned. Hence, they decided to call in to check on them. Lucian briefly explained the Lon family's situation and told his parents that they were likely going to stay the night. Much had happened to the Lon family, and Lucian advised against it when Elias said he wanted to come over. There was nothing the latter could help with anyway, and it was better if he stayed home and took care of the 3 kids. Only then would Roxanne and Lucian be at ease. Although it was approaching 12 o'clock at night, Yennefer was still awake. When Jones noticed that she looked tired, he advised her to head upstairs and rest first. Lucian and Roxanne, the 2 of you should get some rest too. I'll definitely help out with the wedding. I can't believe Sonia didn't tell me anything even though I'm quite well versed in that matter. After saying that, Yennefer excused herself. Apart from a slight cognitive distortion from time to time, she had returned to her original self. Jones' expression was sad as he remained in the living room. After a long moment of silence, Jones finally forced a smile and comforted Roxanne and Lucian. It's all right. If there's truly nothing we can do, we'll just have to treat her like a mentally ill patient and bring her to a professional psychiatric hospital for treatment. He was already prepared for the worst possibility. Mr. Lon, if that's really the case, why don't you give this a shot? Roxanne suggested as she suddenly thought of an idea. Give what a shot? Lucian stared at his wife in puzzlement. Roxanne explained the idea she had in mind. James was a psychologist, after all. Therefore, he could participate in the treatment. However, he carried a burden in his heart and always assumed that his presence would trigger his mother's symptoms and worsen them. Nonetheless, Yennefer's episode had been triggered by the shooting incident in Allender this time, and there was nothing that could prove that her symptoms had been caused by James' presence. I can understand that line of thought, but I'm not sure if James can. Jones' eyes darkened slightly. Lucian immediately said, I'll convince him. Mr. Lon, I'm sure you know how James still has some unrest in his heart. He may have suppressed it for the time being, but it is something he has to overcome one way or another. Mr. Lon, don't worry too much about it. I'm here for you too. I can prevent Yennefer from having a seizure with my medical skills if something goes amiss. Additionally, we should stop giving her sedatives. There will be long-term side effects if she keeps taking them. It will cause the body's endocrine secretion to go out of control and harm her mental state, Roxanne reassured. In the end, Jones nodded in agreement. The couple got into the car and informed James of the situation. James, this is something you and Mrs. Lon must overcome, Lucian emphasized. James hesitated. He found it extremely difficult to make a decision until he saw Jones come over with a smile on his face. The other man patted James on the shoulder. James, I believe in you. We should give it a try. Even if it fails, we can shoulder it together as a family. Over the years, I understood your feelings, and that was the reason why I did not try to interfere. In the end, I am greatly indebted to you. You did nothing wrong back then. Jones' words stunned James, causing a faint light to ignite in the latter's eyes. Over the years, James had long wished for his mother to recover from her illness. He constantly blamed himself for being unable to use a different method to deal with his aunt's nefarious plan. If only he had dealt with it in another way, his aunt would not have fallen into the well and died. James' heart had been constantly tormented by that incident. Dad, you're right. We'll shoulder it as a family. Finally, James made his decision. Lucian, Roxanne, the 2 of you have been up all night. You should go upstairs and get some rest. Upon returning to the mansion and after checking on his slumbering mother, James urged Roxanne and Lucian to get some rest. The 2 of them realized that the Lon father and son still had unspoken words. Hence, they tactfully went away to allow them to communicate. However, they were quite exhausted as well. That night, the 2 of them slept soundly. When they woke up the next day, it was already past 9 o'clock in the morning. When the 2 of them got up to wash up, they heard Yennefer shouting outside the house. Roxanne, Lucian, it's time to eat breakfast. Yennefer appeared to be in great condition that day. She wore a smile as she glanced at Roxanne with a somewhat satisfied-looking expression. When the 2 of them headed downstairs, James came over and informed them that he had brought his mother up to speed when he saw her that morning. Lucian grew a little nervous.
Wer eating?
What was her reaction? Is she willing to go through with it?
No, no.
Lucian, you're mistaken. I only explained to my mother the current timeline. I told her that she had been in a coma for a long time but omitted the part about you and Roxanne getting married. I think she wants to help plan the wedding. She nearly gave Mrs. Farwell a call this morning. So, that was what happened. Roxanne and Lucian exchanged glances. Good thing it was only a false alarm. If James really told Yennefer everything, the latter was likely unable to hold it together. Roxanne, it was thanks to your suggestion that I met with my mother. I was really worried that my presence would affect her greatly. I did not expect her to be this happy, James said as he glanced at the garden. His parents were watering the plants together. Yennefer was currently nagging Jones about the plants. She had tended to the flowers with great care, and yet weeds and various diseases had spoiled them. James, trust Mrs. Lon. She's only a little confused right now. You are always very important to her in her heart. Roxanne took the opportunity to assuage James' unease. Lucian was well aware of his wife's temperament. The latter did not enjoy lecturing others. Thus, he followed up with some words of encouragement and added, honestly speaking, I think your presence calms Mrs. Lon down. I was thinking about the incident in Allender where she had been frightened by the gunshot. Perhaps she had mistakenly thought that you were in danger. Stunned, James fell into deep contemplation. Eventually, a smile appeared on the corner of his lips. I guess I'm not good at diagnosing myself. I tend to think of the worst scenarios. Thanks to Roxanne's and your guidance, I think I've finally understood the situation better. Roxanne and Lucian were pleased to see James smile. It was as if the latter had finally set down a rock in his heart. Now, the psychological guidance would officially begin. This time, James did not try to escape. Yennefer returned to the hall after she finished voicing her complaints to Jones. James, make sure you entertain Lucian and Roxanne properly. It's so rare for them to visit us. Go bring out your father's private coffee stash, Yennefer said as she greeted the couple with a smile. She felt regretful that she had been unable to attend their wedding because she had been unwell. Roxanne waved her hand and said that she did not mind. She also promised to show Yennefer their wedding photos when they had time. Yennefer grinned from ear to ear.
I really envy Sonja.
It would be like a dream come true to have such a talented daughter-in-law. You're flattering me too much, Mrs. Lon, Roxanne replied modestly. James prepared the coffee and served Lucian and Roxanne. Just then, Jones came into the hall, and they began to chat about light-hearted topics. Naturally, the topic of the three children's antics came up. Yennefer was greatly amused. She adored the children and wanted to meet with them as soon as possible. When James felt that the moment was right, he suddenly turned to his mother and declared calmly, Mom, there's something I've always wanted to tell you. It's my most important secret. May I tell you in private? You're a grown man with secrets. I suppose I'm curious about you now. Yennefer smiled as she nagged James, trailing behind him to the study on the second floor. Roxana and Lucian prepared themselves for the upcoming challenge while waiting outside the room. If Yennefer couldn't withstand the truth and her disease worsened, Roxanne would need to help out immediately. Meanwhile, James had walked into the study. He smiled, initiating a casual conversation with Yennefer. The man couldn't find it in him to turn the topic toward his concern. Mom, do you remember that I skipped to 3rd grade when I was 7 years old, and you were worried that my academic performance was going to suffer because of that? Of course. I remember it clearly. Your homeroom teacher thought you walked into the wrong classroom. Mom, do you recall that when I was in 6th grade, there was an older girl who liked to visit our house? You were worried that she would be a bad influence on me. Yes. She moved to some other places after that. If I'm not wrong, she even went overseas. I ran into her parents after that. They told me she got married abroad. James continued asking a series of questions while Yennefer replied honestly. These were all fragments of James' memories before he turned 13 years old, and Yennefer remembered every detail correctly. Wait, James. Why are you asking me these questions? I thought you were going to reveal your secret. Did you do something bad when you were a kid? Yennefer grinned, her expression loving and caring without showing any signs of impatience. Zendale was an impoverished place all those years ago, and the Lon family wished for Yennefer to give birth again. Yet, she refused adamantly for James' sake. Yennefer poured all her love into James unreservedly. James observed Yennefer's reaction before determination flashed across his eyes. He said casually, "Mom, do you remember Aunt Sheba?" Yennefer's smile froze instantly, slowly vanishing into the air. Within 2 seconds, her gaze shifted. The calm, peaceful she originally had changed into a malicious glint. James was shocked. He shouted, Mom.
Mom.
Can you hear me?
Mom.
In response, Yennefer furrowed her brows, wrapping her arms around her head, anguish written all over her face. My head hurts. James, it hurts. Turmoil was evident in her eyes. One moment, Yennefer looked confused. The next moment, she looked fierce. James was all too familiar with the scene before him. It was always the same old scene over and over again whenever Yennefer's illness acted up. Yennefer's personality would shift when everything was over, and she would become a different person. Mom is going to turn into an image of Aunt Sheba that she created.
Oh no.
I need to call for Lucian and Roxanne's help. James grew wary of the situation. He raised his voice, standing up, wanting to seek help.
Clatter.
Yennefer swept the vase off the study table viciously. It smashed to the ground, shattering into pieces with a loud noise. As if engaged in an internal battle, Yennefer complained of a headache repeatedly, clenching her jaws.
Sheba.
Who's Sheba? You're my nephew, James. I'm Aunt Sheba. How could you harm me? Ha.
Tada.
I'm not dead yet. You can't kill me. At last, Yennefer's illness acted up again. Her consciousness changed into those of her twin sister, Sheba. A malicious and frosty glint flashed across her eyes as she glared at James with a sinister smile. Meanwhile, Lucian and Roxanne exchanged shocked glances after hearing the commotion. Jones panicked, wanting to charge in. He worried that Yennefer would hurt herself in the process.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.